And welcome into Getting Help from Uncle Sam, or as we say in the state of Alabama, getting some help from Auntie-Alabama, because obviously we're not doing things from a federal perspective here. We're looking at things from a state perspective. And speaking of state perspective, Mike Holmes is here, our representative for Elmore and a little piece of Watauga County. Right. And we're glad to have you here. You know, it's hard to believe. You, in our last session, you were saying you've been in this position 3 years.
Well, it's been 3 years this week.
Isn't that amazing?
3 years this week.
Wow.
It feels like 30 years in some way, and it feels like yesterday in a lot of other ways.
Well, I remember going to a couple of town halls when you were first, when you came and spoke. And what was very interesting then is you spoke, and then I was able to visit with you and really find out, you know, what your thoughts are. And that was one of the reasons that, you know, I had supported you from the get-go. Right now, in our legislative session that's going on, obviously we're looking at things that pertain to prisons.
Yes.
They'll come up. They may not be as high on the priority list as they were because of other functions. And then, do you think they'll get into the gambling issue at all? And the reason I ask that is the governor has formed a commission. Yeah. And they're not going. They've been expanded to June as far as
they pushed it down the road in that special committee he appointed. And I honestly don't. As crowded as our docket has gotten to be, I don't see that becoming a major driving force. There's a lot of things going on that are discouraging for that idea. If you look at all of the headlines for the last 3 weeks or so, has been the declining revenues in all the lottery states. Mm-hmm. The graph has swung down, and so their revenues are declining. We're a relatively small population state. We're surrounded by competing states that have lotteries. Mm-hmm. So it would be a difficult hill to climb to generate anything like the revenue people think it would, and it would be. Mm-hmm. It's relatively small and probably declining. Mm-hmm. So the fervor seems to have died down some, but just because of that, it's not as promising. If they had made this move 20 years ago, it would be a different story.
Absolutely.
But didn't. And
the old adage, the time was right, and the time is maybe not right.
And it's passed by, in my opinion. I could be wrong. It could come back, but
yes.
There's a lot of things working against it right now. So it could, but I say that's a long shot that's going to be a
we need to let our viewers know that the governor formed this commission. And the reason they formed the commission is to look at gaming in general, not just the lottery, but all aspects of it, because everybody gets all excited and said, we got to do a lottery, but there's more to it than just a lottery. Absolutely. I think you have to look at the whole picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned prisons. That's
absolutely.
The governor has made it his priority for the last this session and the prior session for a massive prison building bill. And quite honestly, we've learned. In fact, I served on that special committee, that Prison Task Force Committee, and one of the answers we kept getting every time anybody mentioned the idea of building new prisons to solve this overcrowding problem, the experts that we hired from around the country told us time and time again, I heard it dozens of times from those consultants, you cannot build your way out of this problem. You got policy issues and you got management issues, and you have to face those. Building new buildings is not going to solve that problem, and that hasn't changed in my view. And in fact, we have the trajectory of our prison population headed in the right direction on the stuff that we've already done. The sentencing guidelines that were passed almost 4 years ago now has really kicked in, and that's the main driving force. We've seen in the last 18 months a turn downward, and we're now down from over 27,000 inmates down to 23,700.
Wow.
That's a huge number. That's almost 20%. I mean, that's a huge number, and it's going in the right way. We set our goal when we passed SB 67. Our experts told us, and we bought into this in this committee that recommended SB 67, that we could hit 20,000 inmates by 2020. Well, that's now 3 years away, and we're ahead of that curve. You know, if we keep this trajectory up, we'll hit that. So that's taking care of itself. The massive building bill is terribly expensive. They're talking about $800 million to build 3 super prisons. There's all kind of issues with that they also are demanding a no-bid contract. That sometimes a lot of people think that's the reason for pushing this legislation, is that the legislation is just a Trojan horse to get no-bid contracts into Alabama for the big builders. They don't want to bid. Their margins are much tighter when they have to bid against their competitors. And this system has worked very well for Alabama for a long time.
Amen.
So, you know, if there's going to be a move like that, it's going to change the way we do business. And looking around at our neighboring states that have tried that, Florida's a great example. It has cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. And in fact, in Florida, they've gone back and repealed it. They've gone back to bidding contracts. It was costing them so much money. So that's in this bill too. That's going to make it very. It's like almost like a poison pill. That's very hard for a lot of legislators to swallow. That doing away with competitive bidding in Alabama, it just doesn't seem right for the taxpayers.
Not at all. The other thing too, what people don't realize is one of the major expenses in the prison system is the medical expense.
Absolutely.
That's probably,
it is.
That's probably the top. If you were to list expenses and line them,
it's huge between medical and mental health.
Yes. Yes.
And the interesting thing there, Jack, is that we have a new commissioner in mental health that's gotten very aggressive about doing what they're supposed to do. Jim Perdue has only been there less than 2 years, but he's shaking that place up and moving fast, and that's a big issue. That's what this latest lawsuit that's has been. Evidence is presented. We're waiting on the judge now to make his ruling.
Well, Mike, we thank you for all the work you're doing. We're going to get you come back here in about another month as we're a little bit further in and see how things are progressing. Okay?
I always enjoy it, Jack. Thanks
so
for
much.
inviting me.
And just remember this, when you want to talk to your representative, do it not during the session, because they're very busy during this session. It may not seem like it, but they've got a lot of committee work and then the actual floor work. Get to them when they're out of session. They'll give you all the time in the world. We'll be right back right after this.